Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a simple but powerful truth. Before you can change the world, you must first change yourself. Too many people spend their lives looking left, looking right, comparing their journey to someone else's. But here's the hook. Comparison is the thief of destiny. If you're always watching someone else's lane, you will never run effectively in your own. Let me ask you a question that might sting a little. How much time do you spend looking at someone else's life instead of investing in your own? Be honest. Because here's the truth. Comparison is the silent killer of destiny. It doesn't come crashing in with a loud explosion. No, it sneaks in quietly. It whispers to you, look at them, they're ahead of you. Look at her, she's more successful. Look at him, he's got it all together. And before you even realize it, your focus has shifted from your own growth to someone else's highlight reel. That, my friends, is the fastest way to lose the race you were born to run. Now, here's the hook. Comparison doesn't just waste your time, it robs you of your belief. Every moment you spend comparing yourself to someone else is a moment you're telling yourself you're not enough. But think about this. When you compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 20, you're setting yourself up for unnecessary pain. You're measuring your beginning against their breakthrough. And that's not only unfair, it's unproductive. See, God didn't design you to be a duplicate. He designed you to be a masterpiece. There's not another you on the planet. There never was, and there never will be. So why in the world would you waste your life trying to be a carbon copy of someone else? Do you know what happens to copies? They fade. They're never as sharp, never as powerful, never as impactful as the original. And you, my friend, were created to be the original. Let me give you another hook. When you compare yourself to others, you're comparing the surface of their life to the struggles of your life. You see the success, the cars, the smiles, the social media posts, but you don't see the nights they cried, the sacrifices they made, the battles they fought in silence. So when you compare, you're comparing your raw footage to their highlight reel. And that's not just unfair, that's deceptive. But here's the breakthrough. You don't have to live in comparison. You can choose today to run your race, to stay in your lane, and to focus on the path God placed in front of you. Imagine what would happen if you took the energy you waste looking left and right and poured it into moving forward. Imagine what would happen if you stopped measuring yourself against people who aren't even running the same race as you. Your destiny is not tied to their path. Your greatness is not defined by their applause. And your worth is not determined by their recognition. Here's another powerful truth. When you focus on someone else's journey, you're neglecting your own. The time you spend comparing is time you could be creating. The energy you spend worrying about their success is energy you could use to build your own. The truth is simple. Comparison is not just a distraction, it's a delay. It pushes your destiny further down the road because you're too busy looking around instead of moving forward. Now let me challenge you. What would your life look like if you stopped comparing for just 30 days? What would change if for 1 month you made a decision to celebrate others, but focus only on your growth? Some of you would finally start writing the book you've been talking about. Some of you would finally launch the business you've been dreaming of. Some of you would finally get serious about your health, your relationships, your faith, all because you stopped wasting your energy on a race that was never yours to begin with. So let me leave you with this thought to hold on to. Comparison is the killer of destiny, but focus is the fuel of greatness. When you focus on yourself, you stop competing with people who don't even know your name, and you start competing with the only person who truly matters, who you were yesterday. And when you do that, growth becomes inevitable, progress becomes natural, and greatness becomes your reality. Here's a truth that may shock you. Greatness doesn't begin with talent. It doesn't begin with luck, and it doesn't even begin with opportunity. Greatness begins with responsibility. And responsibility isn't always glamorous, but it's always necessary. The moment you decide to take full ownership of your life is the moment you unlock the door to your destiny. Until then, you're just waiting for someone to rescue you, waiting for someone to validate you, waiting for someone to hand you what only you can build. But let me give you the hook. Waiting will never produce greatness, only working will. The biggest mistake people make is thinking that someone else is responsible for their success. They think it's the boss's job, the government's job, the economy's job, or maybe even their family's job. But let me tell you something, no one is coming to save you. And the moment you embrace that, you step into freedom. Because when you stop blaming, you start building. When you stop excusing, you start executing. And that's when you begin to see change. Think about this: responsibility is the bridge between potential and power. You can have all the potential in the world, but if you refuse to take responsibility, that potential will die unrealized. How many people do you know who are talented but broke, gifted but stuck, anointed but ineffective? It's not because they're missing ability, it's because they're missing responsibility. They don't want to own their time, their habits, their money, their words, or their choices. But if you won't own your life, you'll always live under the control of someone who will. Here's the hook that might rattle you. Responsibility doesn't restrict you, it releases you. People think responsibility is a burden. No, responsibility is the pathway to freedom. When you take responsibility for your money, you gain financial freedom. When you take responsibility for your health, you gain physical freedom. When you take responsibility for your mindset, you gain emotional freedom. And when you take responsibility for your faith, you gain spiritual freedom. Responsibility doesn't trap you. It equips you to live the life you were created for. Now let me give you something practical. Every single day you have two choices. You can either make excuses or you can make progress, but you can't make both. Excuses sound good in the moment. They let you off the hook. They make you feel justified. They shift the blame, but excuses never build empires. Excuses never create legacies. Excuses never birth greatness. Progress does. And progress is only possible when you own the responsibility for where you are and where you're going. Some of you right now are carrying the weight of unfulfilled dreams, and you think the reason you haven't achieved them is because you didn't get the right break. But the truth is, you don't need a break, you need responsibility. You don't need someone to open a door, you need to get up and build one. You don't need permission to win, you need the discipline to keep showing up day after day, whether anybody notices or not. That's responsibility. Here's another powerful truth: greatness isn't handed down, it's built up. And building requires responsibility. A builder doesn't stand around blaming the weather or the tools. A builder gets to work with what he has, and he makes it happen. In the same way, you can't sit around blaming your circumstances, your past, or your limitations. You've got to pick up what you've got and start building. And when you do, you'll realize you're not as limited as you thought. You're only as limited as your excuses. So I want you to think about this What area of your life have you been avoiding responsibility in? Maybe it's your money. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your faith. Maybe it's your business. Whatever it is, know this. The greatness you're praying for is hiding on the other side of the responsibility you're avoiding. The day you decide to own it is the day you begin to grow into the person you were always meant to be. Let me start with a question that could change your life. If you answer it honestly, where is your focus right now? Because whatever you focus on, you feed. And whatever you feed grows. This is not just philosophy, it's a law of life. Energy flows where focus goes. If your focus is scattered, your results will be scattered. If your focus is broken, your energy will be broken. But when your focus is clear, your energy becomes unstoppable. That's when you create momentum. That's when you see progress. That's when you start stepping into greatness. Here's the hook. Your life right now is the direct result of what you've been focusing on. If you've been focused on fear, you're probably living in hesitation. If you've been focused on doubt, you're probably living in insecurity. If you've been focused on problems, you're probably drowning in stress. But if you shift your focus to faith, to possibility, to growth, to solutions, you'll be shocked at how quickly your circumstances begin to align. Because what you focus on expands. Most people don't fail because they don't have enough time or enough talent. They fail because they keep wasting their energy on things that don't move them forward. They're locked in on distractions instead of directions. They're scrolling through other people's lives instead of building their own. They're more focused on being entertained than being educated. And here's the problem. When you focus on distractions, your destiny starves. Let me give you an image. Imagine holding a magnifying glass over a piece of paper. If you wave it around, nothing happens. But if you hold it steady, the sunlight focuses and it creates fire. That's what happens when you bring your focus into alignment. Your scattered energy turns into concentrated power. Some of you don't need more opportunities. You need more focus. Some of you don't need more resources. You need to learn how to direct the ones you already have. Because energy flows where focus goes. Here's another hook. If you want to change your results, don't just change your actions, change your attention. Some people are exhausted not because they're doing too much, but because they're focused on the wrong things. Worry drains energy. Complaining drains energy. Comparison drains energy. But gratitude builds energy. Faith builds energy. Progress builds energy. If you redirect your focus from what you can't control to what you can control, you'll feel a new surge of strength you didn't even know you had. Think about how much time people spend rehearsing their limitations. They keep saying, I can't do this, I don't have that, things never work out for me. And guess what? They keep getting exactly what they focus on. If you focus on limitations, you multiply them. But if you focus on possibilities, you multiply those instead. The mind is like fertile soil. It doesn't care what you plant. If you plant weeds, weeds will grow. If you plant seeds of faith, seeds of growth, seeds of possibility, that's what will flourish. The soil responds to the seed. Your energy responds to your focus. Now here's the challenge. What would happen if you gave the same focus to your purpose as you do to your problems? What would happen if you gave the same focus to your growth as you do to your gossip? What would happen if you gave the same focus to building your future as you do to scrolling your feed? The truth is, most people are not defeated by lack. They're defeated by misdirected focus. So here's the shift. Stop letting distractions hijack your destiny. Every time you focus on something, you're feeding it. And if you don't like the harvest you're reaping, you've got to change the seeds you're sowing. Focus on what builds you. Focus on what grows you. Focus on what aligns you with your purpose. Because when your focus is right, your energy is right. And when your energy is right, your life begins to move in the direction of greatness. Let me ask you something powerful. Who are you really competing with? Because the truth is, most people spend their whole lives trying to outdo somebody else when the real competition isn't across the street, across the room, or on your social media feed. The real competition is the person staring back at you in the mirror. Here's the hook. The only person you have to be better than is who you were yesterday. If you get caught up trying to beat everyone else, you'll lose sight of the one person. You were actually created to grow. The problem with competing against others is that it sets you up for a game you can't win. Why? Because there will always be someone richer, someone smarter, someone stronger, someone with more opportunities. If your sense of value depends on where you stand next to them, you'll always feel behind. That's why the most successful people in the world don't compete with others. They compete with themselves. Every day they ask, am I wiser than I was yesterday? Am I stronger? Am I more disciplined? Am I more focused? That's the real scoreboard. Here's the hook that might shake you. External competition creates insecurity, but internal competition creates mastery. When you compete with others, you live in comparison, and comparison breeds jealousy, envy, and discouragement. But when you compete with yourself, you live in growth, and growth breeds confidence, momentum, and fulfillment. One path leads to emptiness, the other to excellence. Which one are you choosing? Imagine what your life would look like if, instead of trying to be the best in the world, you simply tried to be the best version of yourself in the world. You don't need to outshine anyone. You need to outgrow yourself. That's how greatness is built. Not by chasing somebody else's highlight reel, but by committing to your own progress. Every single day, one step better. One thought sharper. One habit stronger. That's how you transform your life. Think about athletes at the highest level. Yes, they compete against others, but the great ones, the legends, they understand that the real battle is within. Kobe Bryant didn't wake up every morning thinking about beating just one player. He woke up thinking about beating yesterday's Kobe. That's why he worked out before sunrise. That's why he pushed himself when nobody was watching. Because he wasn't satisfied with yesterday's effort. He was addicted to growth. That's the mentality of champions. Now here's another hook. You don't need to compare your timeline to anyone else's because your assignment is not their assignment. Your purpose is not their purpose. Your season is not their season. Some people harvest in spring, some in summer, some in fall. But everyone who keeps sowing will reap in due time. Stop stressing about who seems ahead of you and start focusing on staying faithful to the race you were designed to run. Here's the truth. When you measure your progress against other people, you'll either end up arrogant or discouraged. If you're ahead of them, you'll get prideful. If you're behind them, you'll get insecure. Neither one builds greatness. But when you measure your progress against your own potential, you'll always be motivated to keep moving forward. That's why the real scoreboard isn't out there. It's in here. Here, it's inside your heart, your habits, your decisions, your growth. So here's the challenge I want you to grab hold of every morning. Wake up and ask yourself, how can I become 1% better today than I was yesterday? That's it, just 1%. Read one page, write one idea, take one action, push one more rep, Save one more dollar. Speak one more word of encouragement. And if you do that consistently, those tiny improvements will compound into massive transformation, because small daily wins lead to great lifelong victories. And here's the hook to lock it in your mind. You don't need to win against others to win in life. You need to win against yourself. If you defeat your doubts, if you defeat your fears, if you defeat your laziness, if you defeat your excuses, nobody out there can stop you. The external world has no power over the person who has mastered their internal world. So stop competing with the world outside and start competing with the person you were yesterday. That's how you rise. That's how you grow. That's how you win. Let me start with something you need to remember for the rest of your life. Success doesn't come from a single action, it comes from sustained momentum. Momentum is the currency of greatness. It's the force that takes small steps and turns them into giant leaps. It's what makes progress feel natural instead of forced. And here's the hook. Once you have momentum, even the obstacles in your way start to feel like stepping stones instead of roadblocks. Think about it like this. Have you ever tried to push a car that was stuck? At first, it takes every ounce of your strength just to make it budge an inch. But once the car starts moving, once the wheels are rolling, it doesn't take nearly as much effort to keep it going. That's momentum. At the beginning, it's hard. At the beginning, it feels impossible. But if you stay consistent, you'll build momentum, and momentum will carry you further than effort alone ever could. Here's another hook. You don't rise to the level of your dreams. You rise to the level of your momentum. Dreams without momentum are just fantasies. Plans without momentum are just paper. Goals without momentum are just words. But when you back them with action, day after day, the energy begins to multiply. And suddenly what felt impossible last year feels inevitable this year. That's the power of momentum. Most people never taste greatness because they keep starting and stopping. They take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. They get excited for a week, then they quit when it gets tough. They live in a cycle of restart instead of a lifestyle of momentum. And the hook here is simple consistency beats intensity. It's not about what you do once in a while. It's about what you do every single day, even when nobody is watching, even when nobody is cheering, even when nobody is clapping. That's how momentum is built. Think about an airplane on the runway. It uses the most energy, the most fuel, and the most effort just to take off. But once it breaks through gravity and reaches cruising altitude, it actually requires less effort to stay in the air than it did to get off the ground. Life is the same way. The hardest part is the beginning. The hardest part is building the habit, starting the business, committing to the growth. But if you push long enough to build momentum, what was once hard becomes automatic. What once drained you begins to drive you. Here's the hook that should excite you. Momentum makes you unstoppable. Once you build it, you don't have to fight for motivation every day because momentum starts to pull you forward. Have you ever noticed how one good decision leads to another? You wake up early and suddenly you eat better. You eat better and suddenly you think clearer. You think clearer and suddenly you work harder. You work harder, and suddenly opportunities show up. That's not coincidence, that's momentum. The enemy of momentum is hesitation. Every time you delay, every time you stop, every time you quit, you lose ground. And starting over always costs more than staying consistent. That's why discipline is so important. Discipline keeps the engine running until momentum takes over. Discipline is the spark, momentum is the fire. And once the fire is burning, it's hard to put out. So let me ask you this. What could your life look like a year from now if you stopped starting over and just stayed consistent long enough to build momentum? What could your business look like if you stopped chasing quick wins and instead built daily habits that compounded over time? What could your health, your relationships, your finances, your faith look like if you decided to keep pushing even when it was hard? Here's the final hook. Momentum is the secret advantage that most people never access. Not because they can't, but because they quit too soon. Don't quit. Don't stop. Don't restart. Push until the wheels are turning. Push until the habits stick. Push until the fire is burning. Because once momentum is on your side, greatness is no longer a question of if. It's only a matter of when. One of the greatest lies people believe is that they need someone else's approval before they can step into their destiny. They wait for the green light, the handshake, the applause, the open door, as if greatness is something that can only be unlocked by another person. But here's the hook. You don't need permission to walk in what you were created to do. The gift God put inside of you didn't come with a permission slip. It came with a responsibility slip. It's already yours, but it won't come alive until you decide to move without waiting for validation. How many dreams have been buried because someone was waiting for someone else to say yes? How many ideas have never been born because the person carrying them was worried about what people would think? Listen carefully. If you keep waiting for the world to give you the go ahead, you'll wait your whole life. Because people who are afraid of their own greatness will never approve of yours. That's why you've got to move forward, whether they clap or not. Here's the hook you need to grab. Your destiny isn't a democracy, it's a decision. Too many people live their lives voting on whether they should pursue their dreams based on the opinions of people who don't even have the courage to pursue theirs. They're asking for advice from people who are stuck. They're waiting for validation from people who have never built anything. And then they wonder why they feel frustrated, why they feel trapped, why they feel behind. It's simple. When you give someone else control of your permission, you also give them control of your progress. Let me remind you of this truth. Every great person you admire had to start without permission. The entrepreneur who built a company, the artist who created a masterpiece, the leader who changed lives, they all had critics, doubters, and naysayers. But they didn't wait for the doubters to disappear before they moved. They didn't wait for universal applause before they acted. They moved anyway. They created anyway. They pursued anyway. And that's what made them great. Here's another hook. If you're waiting for the perfect moment, you'll be waiting forever. Conditions will never be perfect. People will never fully understand. The timing will never feel completely right. But if you move with what you have, where you are, greatness begins to grow in the process. You don't get permission to start, you get clarity by starting. Movement creates momentum, and momentum opens doors. But it all begins with the decision to act without needing approval. Think about this. Some of the very people you're waiting for approval from aren't even thinking about you. They're too busy dealing with their own problems, their own doubts, their own insecurities. So why let people who aren't even focused on you control the direction of your destiny? That's giving away power you were never meant to surrender. The truth is, people may never understand the vision you carry because it wasn't given to them. It was given to you. And if they didn't receive it, they don't have the authority to validate it. That's why you've got to stop explaining yourself to everyone and start executing on what you know God placed inside of you. The hook here is simple. Your assignment doesn't need their agreement. It needs your commitment. So let me ask you, what would you start if you stopped waiting for permission? What business would you launch? What book would you write? What skill would you learn? What life would you live? Too many people go to their graves full of unexpressed potential because they were waiting for approval that was never coming. Don't let that be your story. You already have everything you need to begin. You have the ability. You have the calling. You have the vision. Now, what you need is the courage to move without waiting for applause, without waiting for recognition, without waiting for permission. Because greatness doesn't come from permission. It comes from decision. And the moment you decide, the moment you step forward, the moment you move in faith, that's when doors start opening, opportunities start appearing, and your destiny begins to unfold.